thank you for the presentations that preceded. Dawn, Joe, you know, we have learned so much, so fast, and we need to, because the world is changing fast. I'd like as my sort of headline a quote from Zahi Hawass, one of my fellow explorers in residence at the National Geographic, also director of the pyramids. What a title. Who says, if you do not know your past, you cannot know your future. And what we're doing now, all of us here, a lot of people around the world, trying to document, catalog, make available to all those who follow us, this is going to be their past. They need to know what the world is like early in the 21st century, so that wherever they are in the future, they can look back and measure change over time. That's the genius, perhaps, of the 20th century, now into the 21st, our capability of diving back to assess, not just in terms of decades or even centuries, but geologically speaking, we now have the capacity to really understand ever more accurately questions about who we are, where we might have come from, and where we might be going, or how we're going to get to that place. This image of Earth, taken in December 1968, essentially 50 years ago, about the time that Jack and Laura Dangermond founded this place, Esri. Yay, Jack, yay, Laura. Visionaries, using information in new ways. It was 50 years ago that the internet essentially got up and running. Think of what we now know because of the ability to connect the dots, to take bits and pieces of information gathered here and there, and to be mindful that it was only 500 years ago that that first circumnavigation of the world, Magellan, began. That's only 5 centuries ago. Geologists will tell you that's nothing in terms of time. At the time, people were wedded to the concept that Earth is the center of the universe. Lucky us, we're the center of everything. It's taken a while to really understand what we now know, but what don't we know that we have yet to discover? I think the biggest understanding of our time is the magnitude of our ignorance. We thought we knew it all 500 years ago. And a lot of people today still are of that mindset. Not in this room. I mean, what do you think? Is climate change real? Where's the evidence? We've got plenty of evidence. Not everybody is listening or chooses to hear or take to heart what is now known. The great thing about being a kid at this point in time is that you're the beneficiary of everything that has been learned in the past, and it's now being served up in a way that it's accessible as never before. My father was born in 1900, my mother in 1902. Neither one traveled more than 20 miles from where they were born in their first 20 years. Today's world is so different. You don't even have to travel personally to be able to see the world with new eyes. And I like the tagline that Esri now has, the ability to be able to see what others cannot, using the technology that is now available to not everyone, but it's there should you choose to take advantage of it. So it was actually 50 years ago that I was accepted as one of the individuals chosen to be aquanauts, to live underwater. We didn't do it until, I didn't anyway, until 1970. It was almost 50 years ago. It was the first time that I had the opportunity to stay underwater for a couple of weeks. I mean, I'd been diving before, but to be able to stay day and night, go in and out of a comfortable underwater laboratory where, you know, air, and then to go out and come in and out, not go back to the surface until the decompression at the end. What it really gave to me was what we're celebrating here, is to see what others cannot, to have the ability to look in ways that even now, many people have not experienced what it's like to actually be in the blue part of the planet. We can look at the surface, but there's something special about, you know, hooping it up with a fish and meeting them in some place other than on your plate. So I've done it 10 times now, living underwater in various underwater laboratories. I've used more than 30 different kinds of submersibles and many more variations on the theme of remotely operated vehicles and instruments that you put into the ocean. All of this, I mean, the gift of living at this point in time, to be able to see what others could not see until right about now. It's the ocean we now know, we couldn't know, even when I was a kid, that dominates this planet, this little speck in the universe of very unfriendly options. If we consider going to the moon or Mars as a place to set up housekeeping, Earth is where our history is, it's where we came from, it's where we are. It's going to be forevermore, whatever home we have. It's our home planet. But to understand it, we know so much more about the land, who lives there, what lives there. But the ocean is still largely a frontier. 10 years ago, the idea of working with champions around the world, working with communities of people who care, to embrace that blue part of the planet with protection, with something that goes beyond using the ocean for goods, for services, all the things that we take from the ocean, but to realize that we have to give back. We have to proactively look at the ocean with new eyes to see what others have not been able to see in times past. And so, with the idea that was born of the wish that came when I won the TED Prize back in 2009, to develop a network of protected areas, hope spots, large enough to save and restore the blue heart of the planet. It's not an original idea. Marine sanctuaries, marine protected areas, marine reserves, whatever it is. It's a fairly new idea, considering that it was 1972 when this country established the legislation that made marine sanctuaries possible, 100 years after the first global expedition around the world took place. That was the Challenger expedition. 100 years later, we finally faced up to the fact that maybe some proactivity, whatever, taking care of the ocean was a good idea. We certainly have learned how to use the ocean. We've come precariously close to using some aspects of the ocean up. But now we know. And with respect to understanding what parts of the planet should we really focus on for accelerated protection? Well, when we got a group of people together in 2010 and began Mission Blue, sort of arbitrary. We thought about a dozen or so places. They're like no-brainers. Of course, the Arctic is one of those places. Put a big circle around the Arctic. It's one giant hope spot. Within it, smaller places, but the idea that if we fail to protect the Arctic, it's not just about polar bears, although they matter, or other creatures that are charismatic megafauna. It's about charismatic human fauna, us, and all the rest of life on Earth, or the other end of the planet, Antarctica. Big hope spot, not just about little orange roughy or Chilean sea bass. It's about all of the creatures who shape the nature of the ocean. It's not just rocks and water. It's not just the basic physical nature of wherever you are in the ocean. It's alive. And 50 years ago, access to the high Arctic, access to Antarctica, access to the deep sea, we were still basically scratching the surface. It's only in the last few decades that the technology that has enabled us to go high in the sky has also enabled us to access the deep sea and to see it for the first time with new eyes. 50 years ago, whales were still being taken for pounds of meat, barrels of oil. But there was already a move underway to think about how do we see whales with new eyes and look at them for other values. We've come a long way in that respect. Now, globally, except for 3 countries that still take whales for products, whales are given new respect. And we have still an attitude that needs to shift about understanding why they matter. And you may have heard some of the recent studies that are focused on whales as living animals that do what all living animals do. They poop. Kids love this study, and so do grown-ups. But to realize that this is part of the chemistry of the ocean. It's not just rocks and water. It's not just the basic elements that were there in the early days. It's a changing chemistry fostered by life in the ocean. And when you see what a whale does when it eats krill, when it eats squid or eats whatever, their neighbors, gets processed and it goes back into the ocean and fertilizes the phytoplankton that feeds the krill, that feeds the whales and feeds the birds. And it's just a big continuous minestrone of life. It's taking us until just about now to understand and respect not just what whales do to shape the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle, the chemistry of the planet, but it's every living thing in the ocean. The tiny little copepods, the little sardines, the jellyfish, the rotifers, you name it. On the land, the counterpart are the insects, the birds, the herds of bison and buffalo that used to march across the continent, fertilizing as they went, creating the soil that subsequently we have benefited from with our agriculture, but we've kind of not continued that cycle in a natural sort of way. We've corrupted these basic systems through our actions, unwittingly, not even realizing what we were doing. In the ocean, by cutting the whales out of the system, using them as products, we unwittingly have altered the chemistry of the ocean, of the planet. It's not just the carbon cycle, it's the oxygen cycle. It's the way the whole planet functions, taking up carbon dioxide, generating oxygen. Plants on the land, in the Amazon, on the forests, even in deserts. But in the ocean, that's where the heavy lifting has always taken place and still does in terms of shaping the chemistry of the atmosphere, the chemistry of the earth. Maybe someday we will think with new ways about the whales, as they have in a place where Mission Blue had a board meeting and a Hope Spot launch in July of this year. The Azores, a little piece of the mid-Atlantic ridge that pokes up way out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, where the local residents nominated their island home and the waters surrounding it as a hope spot. This was once, even in fairly recent years, a place where whaling was a basic part of the economy. Well, now, whales are still a basic part of the economy, but rather than dead whales, they're looking at the value of live whales. What a concept. To get those people to step up and look at the world in new ways, with new eyes, and realizing that live whales are more valuable than dead whales, that a living planet is where the action is. Going to go out there with not just current generation, but with some of those who previously were whalers, and see them championing the cause. It's a moment in time that we are now experiencing. But go back earlier in the 20th century, birds were once considered just products. Migrating birds, think about how we did in passenger pigeons, the Carolina parakeet, the prairie chicken. I mean, we once looked at the land. Ed Wilson says over 10,000 years in North America, we consumed the large, the slow, and the tasty. It's only taken us less than a century to do a comparable thing to the ocean, consuming the large, sometimes not even the slow, consider tunas, and the tasty, well, we don't even stop there. We take a lot of things for products, even though they don't necessarily taste good. So I have high hopes that as we begin to see the living world, the ocean, with new eyes, perhaps we will respect tuna alive more than we do in a can or as sushi or however you like your tuna. I like mine, swimming in the ocean, where we have so much to learn from them as well as respecting them. Oh, I don't mean just for their poop. I mean for their role as part of what keeps us alive, the living ocean, not just rocks and water. You can have rocks and water, but if it's not alive, and it hasn't had like 4.5 billion years of background to come to a place that we now take for granted, more or less, where are we? We need to look at life in the ocean with new respect now that we know. Every fish, like every bird, like every cat, like every dog, like every one of us, an individual with individual DNA. So listen up. With whales, whale sharks, whatever, they're individuals, and now there's a computer program that makes it possible to take a photograph of any whale shark you might encounter, submit it to Whale Shark Central, and you might get a match with a known whale shark because of its spots. And now tracking these animals, they're oceanographic instruments, if you will, that tell us where they are in the ocean. And Barbara Block at Stanford and her students and colleagues are actually attaching oceanographic instruments to sharks, to sea lions, to turtles, and getting data. It's pretty cheap. You don't have to pay these turtles as they dive down and gather information from 1,000 meters, as much as 1,000 meters below. And then they come back up, the data goes boop, up to the satellite and back to Turtle Central or wherever. Malpelo Island, another place that pops up in the middle of the ocean off the coast of Colombia, a great place where a champion and a community have gotten behind the concept of a hope spot. And we had an expedition there this past July, and working again with our partners here at Esri, are developing a story map for this, and ultimately the big idea, the big vision, is to have all of the now 130 hope spots all over the world with champions, with communities, as place-based, geospatial reference data that can be gathered over time to be able to develop this network, not just of information, but a network of hope as we begin to connect the dots with people who are anchored to places, who care about the future by acknowledging what's happening now. Another place, also in this Eastern Tropical Pacific network of places that people are stepping up and saying, we care about this place. Socorro Island off the coast of Mexico, also a hope spot visited last year. Gathering information, gathering data, but mostly inspiring the local people who care to keep it going, to anchor the idea of caring for places that they know and love and be willing to commit to taking action. The sharks can't vote. The sharks can't access GIS data. We have to do it for them. We have to be the voice for the ocean, if you will. Galapagos Islands, most recently, just a couple of weeks ago, some of us were there, launching, well, actually returning to a place that was launched as one of the original dozen or so hope spots back in 2009. But this time, we went armed, not just looking at the land, not just acknowledging the creatures that are protected. 97% of the land in the Galapagos Islands is protected. I mean, you can't shoot the boobies, you can't kill the iguanas. The sea lions, although they're in and out of the water, they've been accorded a safety net. You can't kill them either. But all you have to do is go into the ocean, and most of it is fair game for fishing. Only 3% of the waters around the Galapagos Islands are truly safe havens for wildlife. We have a different way of thinking about wild things in the ocean as compared to wild things on the land. It is changing, and it's changing because now we know what we could not know when rules and regulations and laws, guidelines for our behavior were established in the absence of understanding the importance of life in the ocean as it shapes the character of the ocean. We were fortunate on this trip to not just stomp around on the land and just scuba dive. We had a little submarine. The deep sea goes to 500 meters. And we were able to go down and actually look at creatures that are rarely seen by visitors to the Galapagos Islands, probably in a place that no one had ever seen before. I mean, no human, at least. And to see the remarkable diversity that is under the sea. I mean, there are probably a dozen phyla of animals in that single frame, including many that have no counterpart on the land or in freshwater, just in the ocean. We're just beginning to appreciate how important exploration of the ocean is, to peel back the layers of what we don't yet know. We were able to take a young PhD student to go along with us. She's studying a newly discovered forest of kelp that is known to exist in some manner in the Galapagos Islands for half a century, but nobody had actually seen more than just a few scraggly pieces that come drifting ashore. Once in a while you might find one up in the upper region of its range. But kelp, like the kelp here in California, they like cold water. Galapagos Islands, it's right on the equator. And the surface waters of the Galapagos are just a little too warm for kelps to find a favorable place to hang on. But if you get below about 30 meters, it gets pretty chilly because of the cold water that comes sweeping up along the coast of South America and then bends to the west and embraces the Galapagos, and the Cromwell current coming from the west similarly converges there in the Galapagos. And you have a bit of Antarctica if you get down a little deeper than where divers can go. And sometimes there are upwelling areas and you really feel the chill. But we were able to take this young scientist down to see for herself. I mean, she had taken a robot there before. Love robots, love the ROVs. But just as the satellites up in the sky are so important to gathering information, there's nothing like an astronaut to tell you what it's really like. Taking the human brain with all of the memory, all of the, whatever it is that makes us human, and put it on location, whether it's high in the sky, in the forest, or certainly in the deep sea. We had a wonderful time, and very selectively, we didn't just go the way scientists in the past have, using a trawl or a dredge, and you just hope you come up with something interesting when you dump all this dead and dying stuff on the deck of the ship. I've done it, I've been there. But to go in a submersible, or with a nice adroit ROV with a manipulator, you can selectively, that's what we took, 2 samples. They were carefully managed and are winding up in a museum somewhere, no doubt. So, we found a lot of other things too. This actual scene is from Cocos, another part of the eastern tropical Pacific area that is now being looked upon by the nations along this part of the earth with protection in mind, with care in mind, recognizing the problems that we now face that were not there 50 years ago. Plastics were just beginning to come into widespread use. And now many of those plastics that were dumped in the ocean 10, 20, 30, 50 years ago are coming back to haunt us as microplastics, and now even as nanoplastics. What are we going to do about it? One thing going for us is that we know we've got a problem. Imagine if we didn't know. That would be a problem. But it is, and we don't know quite what to do about it. But at least it's on the balance sheet, and we're being able, for the first time, to actually map some of the large concentrations of plastic that have accumulated in the great ocean gyres, for example. But it's not just up there on the top of the ocean. It's everywhere in the ocean, in the air, in us, in the soil. And we have to think about what to do. So just last week, I was in Florida. It's where I have spent many years. My parents chose to move from New Jersey. I'm a Jersey girl, but I'm also a Florida kid. When I was 12, my backyard was the Gulf of Mexico, and it was a special source of joy for me to go back to Dunedin, Florida, along Tampa Bay, and find that a community of people were energized, a handful of champions taking the lead. I didn't say, okay, Florida, you've got to step up and have a hope spot there. They came to us and said, what communities around the world are now doing, we want your help. We want to do something. Can we apply to Mission Blue and become a hope spot? And we have some help at Mission Blue from International Union for the Conservation of Nature, IUCN. It's the oldest conservation organization in the world, and it is global. More than 1,000 NGOs are a part of it. Most countries have, governments have representation at IUCN, and thousands of volunteer scientists participate. And some of them make up the review council for applications that come in from around the world saying, we'd like to be a hope spot. What do we do? How do we qualify? we're just beginning to be able to more fully answer that question. What can we do? It's in partnership with Esri that I think we're getting to a place where individuals can feel that they have the capacity to take photographs, tell stories, gather data in a systematic way that will be meaningful, not just random bits and pieces, not just hearsay, but to provide a discipline so that data around the world can be compared one hope spot to another, so that the existing network of Esri users with data from NOAA, data, the US Geological Survey, that provides a basis, ready-made. We don't have to start from scratch. We've got access to what other people have been gathering over the years, and then layer on that up-to-date information. It's the vision I think that I've somehow had going back to when I first met Jack Dangerman at a lunch that was held at the National Geographic. And I was certainly aware of what Jack and Laura had begun with GIS for the land and how amazingly important that had been, has been, is being for cities, for communities, for nations, for the military, for science, for understanding, gathering data, putting it together, sharing it in new ways to see what heretofore no one has been able to see as we pull these bits and pieces together to see the world with new eyes. And I said, what about the ocean? It wasn't until 2002. Well, actually, I think I said it at a user conference 20 years ago. 1999, I think that was, what about the ocean? What about the ocean? Doing a great job with the land. What about the ocean? It's most of the world. I remember saying something like that to John Hankey, who was the guy who took the idea of Google Earth to Google. It was called Keynote when he took the company to Google. And I did have the audacity to say at some big conference in Spain where John Hankey and I were speaking, publicly I said how effective Google Earth was to be able to find your backyard, find your neighbor's backyard, find Starbucks, but you should call it Google Dirt. I did, I said it. What about the ocean? But I'd already said that to Jack. And Jack didn't just sit around. In fact, I was invited to speak in 1999. And it wasn't long after that that Dawn Wright was lured away from a really important place that she had up at the University of Washington in Seattle and became the chief scientist. Well, you heard her today speaking for the ocean, speaking for the whole planet, but the ocean is now clearly embraced with knowledge, and it's getting better all the time. I was so pleased to be asked to write the foreword to Dawn's first GIS ocean book, 2002. Huh. It wasn't that long ago. Think of what we've learned. Think of how now the ocean and atmosphere are being pulled together in ways that not only did not exist half a century ago, let alone 500 years ago, but now we know. And for the gathering in the Gulf of Mexico, to get that community energized was a source of great satisfaction to me. I met with the mayor, I met with the city manager, I met with some of the local enthusiasts. I met with the kids, and Shannon, where are you? Shannon the Shark, there she is. She's our GIS champion at Mission Blue, as well as many other things. She engages the kids in conversation, and then that's a story, gets passed along. It becomes a part of what people love to know, want to know. After all, the next 50 years they will be looking back at this time and either saying, thank you, thank you, thank you for doing what you've done to make the world go from this decline to something better, or else they'll be really cross that we didn't take this opportunity. Well, here's the community gathered to hoop it up and celebrate the launch of the latest Hope Spot. It was such a joyful occasion. I was there to cut the ribbon. Well, it was a ribbon of plastic, symbolic things that had been gathered just the week before and strung along while we're cutting through it with something special called knowledge and caring. The BBC was there to document it because Mission Blue has been adopted along with National Geographic and Rolexes Perpetual, as part of Rolexes Perpetual Planet campaign starting in 2020 to help celebrate the ocean. We are looking forward to working with expeditions. Imagine, we have 130 destinations out there, and we just have to go and dive, get little submarines if we can to explore the blue part of the planet, and to engage the kids, to engage the mayors, to engage the city managers, to engage anybody who's willing to step up, certainly the divers. There's a whole group of people who care, who ask me all the time, what can I do? I see the ocean is changing. I hope we'll have an answer that is more meaningful than has been possible in the past. Birdwatchers developed a discipline over time about how to take measurements, how to identify birds, how to record in a systematic way a database that ultimately has served us very well to understand. But we need to go deep. We need to go below where divers go. We need to go ultimately to the deepest parts of the ocean. And I'm committed to helping develop new little submersibles so that any one of us, including kids, can get out there, down there, to be witnesses, to see what others cannot. And for 5 years, working with the National Geographic, working with NOAA ships, NOAA personnel, with a grant from the Goldman Foundation. It was private, public, industry, academia. You know, we really got a great community in this country energized, and now the idea with Mission Blue is to take that concept global, to go to places. Marine sanctuaries were the target for sustainable seas expeditions from 1998 to 2003, but now we're looking at hope spots, not necessarily areas that are already protected, but places that are in bad shape, like San Francisco Bay is a hope spot, launched also this year, with a community of people who say, no, we can't go back to what was, but we can make it better than it otherwise would be, unless we take action now. And they're doing it. So, onward and downward. Right now, this year, the Deep Seabed Authority is carving up the ocean, giving out leases for mining in the global commons. I mean, half of the world is beyond national jurisdiction. And there's rampant fishing. Some of it, quotes, legal, but a lot of it not. Taking from the global treasury, if you will, our life support system at risk, because we don't really know enough to be able to say, here's why you can't do this. You must not go mine the deep sea. Why would you? It's still intact. Are we going to continue doing what we've always done, just take, as if nature is infinite? Or can we please wake up and realize it's a living planet? We must embrace those areas that are still in pretty good shape and restore health to places that we have diminished one way or the other. The deep sea is probably part of the reason that this planet is still functioning more or less in our favor. We're half of the planet basically is, the high seas. It's the heart of the blue heart of the ocean, and it's deep. It's not just the surface, it's not just the bottom, it's the water column that is alive. at risk because of embracing that habit that we've always had to cut the trees, kill the birds, eat the animals, take wildlife from the ocean. Whales are good for meat, they're good for oil. What else are they good for? We can answer that now. We have the evidence. We have evidence, but we aren't catching up with the laws that still permit misbehavior in terms of taking care of the living systems that take care of us. So, fortunately, this is a little kid who grew up to be president, who married well, Laura Bush, who was very influential in getting George W. Bush to sign into law one of the hope spots. It wasn't called that at the time, but it was the National Marine Monument, the Papahanaumokuakea Marine Monument, that was quadrupled in size by President Obama, another little kid who grew up to be president. He uses his power in this case to take care of something that all of us require. And here, the president of Chile, who was about to become the host of the COP25 Conference in Santiago, but unfortunately, because of political unrest at home, that's been moved to Spain. But maybe it will still be what Sebastián Piñera had in mind, and that was the ocean COP, the blue COP, the first time that the ocean would be headlining a climate conference. It started in 2015, and it's been gaining traction. For the same reason that back now 50 years ago, that almost 49 years ago this year, but 50 years ago next year, when NOAA came into existence. Bob White, who was the original administrator of NOAA, was on the Stratton Commission before that, recommended strongly that oceans and atmosphere should be brought together in one agency. They called it the wet NASA initially. But for whatever reasons, it became a part, not as a separate agency as NASA has been, but under the Department of Commerce. But at least you had atmospheric scientists and ocean scientists really working together 50 years ago with consequences that we are now really able to embrace the benefits of that collaboration. Seems so logical. President of that little island nation, Palau, where the next Our Oceans Conference will take place next summer. Tommy Remingasau, who, like President Piñera, is a diver. He sees the ocean in a different way than most people who don't dive. He gets it. It was under his personal influence, with support from his community, his nation, his people. Only got 20,000 people as residents of Palau. But they agreed to protect all of their sharks. No killing of sharks in any of the waters of Palau. Because every shark they calculated was worth $1 million alive, a dead shark, a few $100s. I mean, live shark, good for crazy people such as I who pay big bucks to go to Palau to see the sharks. But more than that, 80% of the entire exclusive economic zone is a safe haven for all creatures who live there. 20%, some fishing is permitted in a more traditional way. What a concept, to proactively say that we will take care of the ocean and realize that the best thing we extract from the sea is not oil or gas or whales or fish or shrimp or lobsters or whatever it is. It's our existence. It's our existence. We can now understand what we could not see, could not understand before. We have a chance. Scientists, the climate scientists are saying a 10-year window, the next 10 years, will either make it or break it, depending on what we do or fail to do. And it's like most of the world is still sleepwalking. Yeah, we see it, it's out there, but not really taking the action that we need. One of the things that I think can and will make a difference is exactly what you are doing. I want one of those globe on the sphere, world on a sphere in my living room. I want it in everybody's living room. I mean, and that's kind of what you're doing. What we're able to take knowledge in real time and make it accessible, not just to nerdy scientists. I mean, I love nerdy scientists. But we need to get the nerdy kids, and we need to get the non-nerdy adults. We need to get people to realize what a miracle it is that we exist at all, that Earth exists at all, and that humans are changing the nature of nature. And I love the fact that at Mission Blue, we have the opportunity to work with you, to work with Esri, to tell stories, to develop maps, to energize the community around the world so that everybody can see what no one heretofore has been able to see, and to know not only what we need to do, but then to do it. Thank you.